Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us here for Sunday School. I'm Minister Abram Davis. We are continuing our lesson through the church. We took a break for Easter, for the celebration of Easter, and I really hope that you have been enjoying us. We're going to actually go back. There's a section that I skipped concerning the Sermon on the Mount. And we're going to go back to the Sermon on the Mount, and then we're going to move forward with everything else that we have planned for Sunday school. So, what I want to point out is the Sermon on the Mount, especially the particular passage that we're going to be looking at, really occurs in Matthew chapter 5, all the way through the end of chapter 7. And the Sermon on the Mount is really the basis of which we get what we call our Christian ethics. And it sets up the framework by which we as believers are and should conduct ourselves by. And it's the basic structure follows that it goes up into an ascending order and then it comes back down. What I mean by that is first we get the Beatitudes, then we get into some discussions about how we should conduct ourselves. Then we get into righteousness before people, goes up to the prayer, which is the central part. And it's from this central part in which the goal is to have the kingdom of heaven on earth as it is in heaven. And then from there, he goes back into righteousness in comparison with the Pharisees, righteousness and wealth, various other teachings and relations with other people outside of the community. And then he ends with responses, and that those who respond well and they are good teachers, and those who respond bad and who end up being excluded from the kingdom. And that is the basic structure of the Sermon on the Mount. So the questions we have to ask ourselves is, as we look at the Sermon on the Mount, what is it that Jesus was looking to do? It's interesting to note that the Sermon on the Mount comes after the temptation and after the baptism of Jesus. The baptism of Jesus. And so one of the things we find ourselves looking at is Jesus is dealing with what does it look like to be a part of the kingdom community. In the kingdom of community, we see what are known as the Beatitudes and verses 1 through 12. In the Beatitudes, there in some translations, it tells us, blessed is this person. And another way we can think about it is happy is the person. And sometimes we may view these things as separate categories, but essentially what we should see is that part of the blessing is to what it really means to be happiness and what it really means to be happy. And as we are really getting a better handle of mental health in relation to believers, one of the things that we can gain and pull from this is that real happiness, a sense of understanding who we are, is based upon our right relationship and a right alignment with the person of Jesus Christ and who God is. And as we look at the church, these are the basic structures and tenets of the church by which we as believers need to carry ourselves under. And various churches today, these are the things that we are talking about is, what does it mean to be a Christian in our particular context? Whether it's where you live here in America or if you live abroad, whether you are a child or you are a parent, whether you are a student, whether you are a teacher, in whatever category you find yourself, what does it mean to be a believer? We are also shown what does it look like in that we are the salt and the light of the world. And because we are the salt and the light of the world, there is a duty that is required of us to make sure that we are flavoring the world and that our light is shining because that's who God is. There are various other things that we see concerning murder, adultery, divorce, oaths, and vengeance. And essentially what Jesus is doing is he's making it clear that his aim is not to do away with the law, but to really bring fulfillment to the law. And if you remember earlier in our Sunday school, we did discuss what the law did. And so one of the things we can gather from this is that as we are looking at what Jesus is doing is he is showing us what the intention of the law was the whole time. And oftentimes when we look at the law, we just think about it, it's just doing and not doing, and it's blind obedience. But as you recall, one of the key things we pull from the law is that it always starts off with, because I am the Lord your God, here is the commandment. And after the commandment is given, then it ends with, because I am the Lord your God. So the laws flow from who God is. And as we understand that this law flows from who God is, we see that what Jesus is doing is that the purpose of the law was to always get our hearts into right alignment, into right position, and into a right perspective with who God is. And that it's not just we should not commit adultery, but we need to be careful about not committing adultery within the heart, because it's from adultery within the heart that leads into this outer manifestation. It's not just actually going out and killing others, but do we have the right attitude towards our neighbors within our heart? And if we have the right attitude towards our neighbors in our heart, then it will not flow into a discrimination or hate or racism or sexism or other things that may flow out of that. But we've got to make sure that we have right relations and right understanding within our heart. And this is really what it flows from, is having the right heart attitude, the right core, the inner core needs to be right. And that's why we need to be filled with the Spirit of God so that we can overcome these things that would stop us from being in right relationship with God. And then as we go into chapter 6, we are told that our righteousness needs to exceed that of the Pharisees. And the Pharisees, what they had a good goal, and that they really wanted to make sure that we rightly interpret the law. But the point is, there was so much just rules and regulations and obedience. And what you'll notice is that not too many people can be obedient to rules and regulations for the sake of being obedience within itself. But usually, even if you have children and you tell your child not to do something, they typically respond with why. And so in the Sermon on the Mount, we get the why. We get that our righteousness is based upon the character and who God is, and that our goal is to bring others to see who God is. This sets up the basic structure of what the church is about and who Jesus is. And from here, we're going to go into next week. We're going to talk about the various offices held within the church. And all this flows from the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount, even as we look today and as we preach, it's usually one aspect of the Sermon on the Mount. And it's the major and the basic structure and preachings of the church. I hope that you enjoyed today's Sunday school lesson as we continue to discuss about the church. And we're going to tie all of this in together and understand what really is the church today and what are some responses. I hope that you enjoyed today.